plans. This morning, we're going to be looking at that. And in particular, here in James chapter 4, James says, "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go and do this, or go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money. Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes. Instead, you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or that. As it is, you boast in your arrogant schemes. All such boasting is evil. If anyone then knows the good they ought to do and does not do it, it is sin for them." This morning we're looking at making plans. And I was reading about a young man who went into a corner store. He went into the store to rob the store, and so he had a gun, and he demanded cash from the cash register. And after the cashier put the cash in the bag, the robber saw this bottle of alcohol behind, and he wanted it. And so he told the cashier to put it in the bag as well, and the cashier said, "Well, no, I can't do that. I don't believe you're 21 years old." And the robber said that he was. "Of course I'm over 21. The clerk still refused to give it to him. But the robber decided to prove that he was 21. He took out his driver's license. He gave his driver's license to the clerk. The clerk looked it over and agreed that indeed the man was over 21. He put the alcohol into the bag. The robber ran from the store with all of his loot. The cashier then promptly called the police and gave the name, the address of the man that he got from his license. The police arrested the robber 2 hours later at his home. The robber made plans, but they fell through. You see, we all make plans of one sort or another. Some will make plans for college or what they're going to do after high school. Some will make plans for jobs, maybe for marriage or family, or plans for vacation or retirement. I know our plans this summer had to change as far as vacation. Because you see, making plans in today's COVID world is much more difficult than at any other time. And one of the phrases that I've heard over and over again that it doesn't really sit well with me is people are calling this the new normal. And I would say that there is nothing normal about this time at all. There is nothing normal about what's happening in our world. I was listening to a gentleman by the name of J.R. Briggs, and he said this in looking forward. He said that this helps him to reframe how he sees life today and into the future. He calls it the new reality. And I know it's just a different word, the new normal, the new reality, but it gives you a different sense of what things are. You know, it's hard to think about long-range planning right now, 5, 10 years down the road. There's just no certainty. There's a lot of uncertainty in this new reality. But one of the things that J.R. said in this new reality is that he's been encouraging and coaching people to look at life in a different way, through a different set of lenses. And those lenses are now, next, new, and eternal. And in this passage that we read from James, I think it has a lot to say about how we live life right now, how we make plans for the next, the new, how we prepare for eternity. You see, James is talking right into where we are. And I believe that he gives us some solid counsel for our world today. In James 4:14, he says this. He says, "Why, you don't even know what will happen tomorrow." That verse is so true for today. Because as I said earlier about my friend Jeff DeYoung, we've seen this in Moncton, we've seen it in Campbellton. Things are going along great, and then boom, everything changes. This is part of our new reality that we find ourselves in, that we need to live for Jesus now. Each day brings new opportunities. And, when you enter into the new day, maybe you might want to ask a few questions. Who is it, Lord, that you want me to connect with today? Who is it that you would want me to call? Or what can I do for Christ now? Or how can I steward, that is, look after what God has entrusted to me today? And one of the greatest things we have is our time, how we use our time. Another question might be, what do I need to get done today before my head hits the pillow tonight? I looked at my front gutter. I had already cleaned out the front gutter, but the leaves just kept on coming. And so I looked at my front gutter this week and I noticed I had to clean out that gutter because I didn't want it to freeze in the winter. And I needed to get it done before, as we've seen. Last night, how cold was it? Minus what? 8. Things are going to start to freeze, and whether we want to hear it or not, snow is coming. So what is it that we need to get done today before our head hits the pillow? The now is all about how we live for Jesus within the day. The now. What about the next? JR says the next is really, looking at 3 to 4 days, maybe 7 days down the road. To seek God's guidance in those next days. For me, this week I'm going to be traveling to Bayside Camp for a retreat. I know that that's on my agenda. I know that that's next. And so my prayer has been, Father, what do you want to do in my heart? What do you want to do in my mind, soul, and spirit over these next few days at this retreat? Maybe a question you might want to ask is, what do you see in your life over the next 4 to 7 days? What is it that's coming down the pipe? What is it that you're looking ahead for? What are the things that you want to do next? What are you looking ahead to do? Give those to God. And then there's the new. The new is looking a little bit further down the road. And in the new, what needs to change as we look down the road a couple of months? We can still make plans even though things are up in the air. What is Christmas going to look like? My mom has already asked us, what are you doing for Christmas? What are your plans? Well, Mom, the plans right now are that after Christmas we'll be coming down for a visit. For you, who's coming over? Where are you going to go? How far can you go? And I think a question that we need to ask is it worth it? This past week, there were 2 new cases of COVID in Fredericton. They were 2 people aged 70 to 79. They had traveled somewhere, international it says, and they had come down with the disease. Well, if you've been watching the news at all through the course of this week, 2 days later, 2 people from the age 20 to 29 associated with this couple that went for international travel came down with COVID. And then the next day, someone 40 to 49 in that same family bubble came down with COVID. And then yesterday, there was another one, someone 19 or under. All because they traveled abroad. Was the trip worth it? When we think of the new, when we think of, what we're going to be doing, say, at Christmas time, we need to take those things into account. See, in James 4:13, he says this. He says, "Now listen, you who say today or tomorrow we will go to this or that city, spend a year there, carry on business, and make money." This verse highlights a person who's focused on this world and making business plans. Very simply, the plans were to go to a certain city, stay there for a year, do some business, make some profit. As we look at this, what bothers James so much is not what is done, but what is not done. They leave God out of their plans. And so James's problem was not the planning, what to do now, what to do next, what's new, but rather the planning that depended on the person's ingenuity alone. Don't get the wrong idea. It's good to make plans. In fact, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus encourages his disciples to look ahead and to plan as they made life's decisions. The difference between the planning that Jesus encouraged in Luke 18 and what we find in James 4 is the attitude behind the plans. In James 4, we find that people are making plans based on their own self-confidence, an assumption that the future was entirely in their control. And as we know, things are definitely not in our control. It's a worldly planning with a desire for earthly riches. The reason why James deals with this problem here is this. You see, to approach life with these priorities is to live in friendship with the world. And this is the very sin which James has already condemned in James 4:4. Where he said this, he said, "You adulterous people, don't you know that friendship with the world is hatred toward God? Anyone who chooses to be a friend of the world becomes an enemy of God." Compare that with the planning that we see in Luke 18, where Jesus says, or we see in Luke 18:28-30, Peter tried to regain some initiative. And he said, "We have left everything we own and followed you, didn't we?" "Yes," said Jesus. "And you won't regret it. No one who has sacrificed home, spouse, brothers and sisters, parents, children, whatever, will lose out. It will all come back and be multiplied many times over in your lifetime. And then the bonus of eternal life." You see, we need to seek God's will in the now. We need to seek God's will in the next and in the new. We need to ask Him for His guidance, to direct our plans, to make them His. See, Jesus points the disciples and us not only past this life, but to eternity. And that our ultimate focus should be eternity and not this world at all. In James 4:14, we see this. He says, "Why, you do not even know what will happen tomorrow. What is your life? You are a mist that appears for a little while and then vanishes." James clearly demonstrates that from a human perspective, we cannot be confident in what is going to happen tomorrow. The same individuals who are speaking of their plans for the next day actually had no idea what to expect from the future. Their planning was actually the very essence of friendship with the world. They ignored God's will and had complete disregard for the Scriptures. Solomon addressed this very same issue in Proverbs 27:1, where he said, "Do not boast about tomorrow, for you do not know what tomorrow may bring forth." You see, we do not know what will happen tomorrow. We don't even have any guarantees that we'll make it to tomorrow. Jesus may come back. And this can be pretty scary stuff. And so, sometimes we don't like to think of life this way. But this is the way it is. And it shouldn't be scary. If we have faith in God, then we can face the uncertainty of tomorrow with peace, knowing that He has our lives in His hands, knowing that He is in control, knowing that He is the one that we can depend upon for our security. Even though we do not know what will happen tomorrow, we do know that our God is in control of tomorrow. We can trust that God will work through every situation for our good. As we saw earlier in this sermon series from James chapter 1, verses 2 to 4, it says, "Consider it pure joy, my brothers, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith develops perseverance. Perseverance must finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." And then in Romans 8:28 it says this, it says, "And we know that in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who have been called according to his purpose." You see, the people that James tells us about did not live their lives in this way. They forgot that our lives are just a vapor that appears for a little while and then vanishes away. In the context of history and eternity, our lives are nothing more than the steam rising from a cup of coffee, or the warm breath in a winter morning. I remember when I was in New Harbor, there was a gentleman there by the name of Barney Langley, and Barney was 93 years old, and Barney had something that he liked to do, and that was, after 5 years, he would trade his car in, and he would get a new one. He was 93. He had traded his car in at 90. He was planning on trading it in at 95. And one day I was sitting in his living room and I was talking with him, and I said, "Barney, 93 years, that's an awful long time." And he looked at me and he said, "You'd think it was, wouldn't you? But it seems like it just began and it's almost over." And this isn't to say that I can't come and visit you sometime, but 2 weeks later he passed. He had a heart attack. He didn't know what tomorrow held, but he still had plans for the future. He was planning to trade his car in at 95, but he didn't know if he'd be there or not. But God had blessed him in such a way that he was able to do that. You see, the point is that our lives here on earth are not only fragile, but they are temporary. While we're on this earth, we are as fragile as a vapor, and we are only here for a little while. Our time on this earth is short, but eternity with God, well, it's so much more. And we must keep this in mind as we live our lives here. See, this is why in Luke 18, it didn't matter that the disciples had left their homes. What mattered was that they were planning and preparing for when this vapor of this life was over. You see, James was requiring his readers to trust in God rather than a well-thought-out plan for the future. And to live with the understanding that God is in control of our tomorrows, our next, our new. This was the attitude that James was looking for. And this is what we find in James 4:15, where it says, "Instead you ought to say, if it is the Lord's will, we will live and do this or do that." And in Luke 18:29 and 30, it says, "Truly I tell you," Jesus said to them, "no one who has left home or wife or brothers or sisters or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom of God will fail to receive many times as much in this age and in the age to come, eternal life." See, Jesus encouraged his followers to plan on the future with a desire for eternal riches. In living this life, our long-range plans ultimately should be eternal. Looking forward to when God makes all things new and restores things to the way they were before the fall, the way things were supposed to be, living in fellowship with our God. As I shared with you last week, I love to read stories. And I love to read books. And one of the book series that I've read multiple times is The Chronicles of Narnia. And in the final book, on the final page, so I'm letting the cat out of the bag if you've never read the stories, okay? This is the end of the story. Some of the children who have been to Narnia lament that they once again must return to their homeland, the Shadowlands. But Aslan, the lion who represents Jesus, has the best news of all for them. Aslan spoke to the children, and he said, "You do not yet look so happy as I mean you to be." Lucy said, "We're so afraid of being sent away, Aslan, and you have sent us back into our own world so often." "No fear of that," said Aslan. "Have you not guessed?" Their hearts leapt, and a wild hope rose within them. He said, "There was a real railroad accident. Your father and mother and all of you are, as you used to call it, in the Shadowlands. You are dead. The term is over. The holidays have begun. The dream has ended. This is morning." And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for this is the end of all the stories. And we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. I love what Paul said in Romans 8:18. He said, "Yet what we suffer now is nothing compared to the glory he will reveal to us later." You see, ultimately, eternity is our destination. And Jesus paid the price by dying on the cross and rising from the dead to offer his life for our now, for our next, for our new, with the ultimate destination of eternity being in mind. And this morning we're going to spend some time in communion. We're going to join together. But as we make our way to the table, we're going to sing together, "Cleanse Me." We're going to sing only one verse of this song. And so I'm going to invite you to stand with me. And those at home, if they would like to join us in communion, just make sure you grab some juice and some bread. But as we prepare our hearts, let us sing together this song, "Cleanse Me."